Okay, Erin Marie Lynch, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank
We're
you.
going to be talking about your book, Removal Acts, and I was delighted to get this book and to start reading it. And the more I read, the more I just fell into it and just really immersed myself in it. And the first thing I noticed about your book is that it was in two parts with a foreword with one poem in that section, and then the rest of the book is the afterword with all the rest of the poems. And so when I was reading some reviews of the book, after I read the book, some people were saying, well, they interpreted that as being sort of like the we were and now we are kind of dichotomy. But it seemed to me that the missing middle piece is really, it seems to me to point to the unspeakable and to all of the violence and the erasure that happened to the Dakota people. And I don't know, did you arrive at this structure, which is brilliant, by the way, at first and then kind of right into it? What do you think it evokes for you, or what do you hope your reader will see in that?
Yeah, that's a nice reading of it. I like that. I think that, yeah, like I think of it as the text of the book is not there. Sort of like we're all existing in the after of something. Um, you know, I think in terms of the where how I came to it, that came actually a little bit later on. It was more traditionally structured for a long time. But the figure poems, that sort of become the scaffold throughout the long section. There's like every
Mhm.
4 or 5 poems. There's this recurring series. Once I interpolated those into the book, then it let me have this structure, because otherwise I didn't feel like I could have all of the poems in one section. That needed some way, something to give it like a skeleton, like a spine. So once I put those poems into the book, then I sort of just uncovered this structure, because I felt like I could have all of those poems in one section without it being
Mhm.
confusing for the reader. Um, and then in terms of the reading of it, I like the way that you're reading it. And you said that a reviewer said that do you mind saying
It
that again?
was it was the forward was the we were, and that the
Uh-huh.
afterward is the we are.
Yeah, I like that too. That's how I think of it, as like I said, kind of, if I think about it as a kind of removal, that the actual text of the book, whatever that might be, has been removed. And so what's left is the after of something. And the after of something, of course, like being the present, you know?
Yes, yes.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, great, great.
So I'm open to all of those readings.
Good, good. Okay. Um, as I've read people read about reading the book, they've said, compared you to different poets that are writing now. This is such a unique collection that I hate to compare it to anything. But the immediate comparison that came to mind as I was reading it was Claudia Rankine with Citizen. And even though the material's very different in many ways, there's some similarities. And the fact that you were willing to break up a structure and break up lines and break up pages and rearrange things to show the removals, you're doing more than erasure, more than some of the other things that have been done before. Made me have that comparison come to mind. Did you meet any internal resistance or external resistance from doing that, or anything where a publisher said, I can't print that on the page? Or
No, no, not at all. And part of that is because I was very particular about who I wanted to work with. And Grey Wolf is very open to the needs. They're very author focused and very open to the needs of the author. They also have like a really long track record of working with poets who are doing things that look a little different on the page. And, you're bringing up, Citizen, of course, is Claudia Rankine's most famous book, but her first book, I think it was her first book that was with Grey Wolf, Don't Let Us Be Lonely, if
Mm.
you've read that, is she's an interesting writer. This was, several years ago, and it has a lot of images in it. It's like also structured, in maybe a less straightforward way. And there's a visual focus in that book as well. So I think that there's a lot of writers working with Grey Wolf that are doing things, approaching things in more of a slant way. I also think like the stuff that I'm doing, I don't feel like it's that or pushing the envelope that much. I feel like, like I feel like every issue of many journals, there's poems that look sort of similar and are using like visual strategy. So I don't feel like I'm doing anything particularly groundbreaking. But it is interesting, to think that, and then where you start trying to get a book published to see how people push back on that. Like there are certain contests where you can't submit a book that has images in it. Some of the bigger contests, actually.
Right.
And I know that comes down a lot of the time to publishing constraints and just not being able to pay for, with the budget of small press publishing, not being able to pay for photographs or for images. But yeah, to be able to find a press that supports that was really important to me, because I sort of wrote the book, created the book, just like assuming that would happen. Not Grey Wolf specifically, but assuming that that would be okay. And I did have people talk to me about it and say, like, you should have a version of this that doesn't have any images in it, because you might not be able to get this published. And I thought that was so crazy because, like, again, to me, I was like, I'm not doing anything that, that groundbreaking.
Yeah. I think there's still so much poetry out there that's still the left justified,
Yeah,
like looking normal, quote unquote, on the page.
which is great too.
Yeah, it is great. I love that as well. But this is just done differently than anybody else's I've seen. And I really had fun with it. And yet it's such a not fun topic. What's underlying it is so tragic and so sad. I wondered if you would read, just to start us off with, on page 13, 8.5 by 11.
Sure.
And I think that will get people a taste of your book.
Okay. Yeah. So, let's see. And sometimes when I read this, it's a little different than it looks on the page. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
8.5 by 11. Interesting story, written in red ink at the top of my mother's paper. Is this even true? 1972, 8th grade American Indian unit. Even then, her faultless cursive, recounting her father's recounting of Sitting Bull's murder. Today we learn to say who we are in Zoom Dakota class. Tiles enclose faces, Command Shift A, unmute. Shapes move through mouth. Afterward, I forget everything. Walking the dog past beautiful people lifting weights, stretching by the bronze bust of Leif Erikson. Glistening populace of the open field. Shadows keep casual intimacy, deepen in overlaps. Homework. What is all the information you can give someone about yourself, and what would your introduction sound like? Half-second misaligned, perfecting an echo's echo. But my legs are in running shorts, and my face is on dating apps, and I check the box for on government forms. Ergo I am, in any residual sense, phenotypically / culturally / in terms of my rearing, as well as in case of receipt of cultural or academic capital from the largely establishment, that is to say, I am, to any glance, passing or otherwise. In the documentary, A Fisherman's Voiceover, we are living out long-term genocide. He slits a salmon, points to good flesh. The terms of ness are long-term, and to be is endpoint, of every room that has included me for being meekly and legibly. Finally, there was the groundless shame of the inadvertent imposter, wrote Adrian Piper. She looked to the gaze, but wasn't. If I wrote in on paper, it would look like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You invoke what's not there so well that even without being able to see it on the page, I think people can understand what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I was looking at a line, it's not in this poem, about you putting on a dress. And then later the photos show up in the book quite a bit later. I think it's the one on page 20 from the Archive of American Object Lessons. And the image shows up later in the book. And when you get to that image, it's like a recognition of something that you've experienced before. Your images, your figures, your pictures, they're all, the space on the page, they're all very important to what you're writing about. And I'm wondering if the words come first, or the space, or the image, or do you write from the image? Or is it different every time?
Yeah, it's kind of different every time. I never start with a form, unless I'm writing like a sonnet or something, which usually even then, I think I had one poem in here that was a sonnet at one point and ended up being something else actually. But I never start with like the way it looks. So even the poems that have like a more concrete poetry bent or like a visual poetry bent, they don't start that way. They start somewhere else. And I'm a big believer in like organic form and the poem finding the form that it needs. Over the course of writing it, often the form comes last for me and is a way for me to really pop things into place. I take a really long time to write. And recently I learned that many writers will write a poem from beginning to end. I didn't know this. Like they'll write the poem from beginning to end, and that's not my process at all. It's a lot more circuitous than that. And often the form does come last. In terms of the images, again, like I find like things are often very piecemeal for me, and it takes a long time for them to coalesce. So I had these images of myself in this dress, and I actually did it was a completely different piece that I made. It was a video piece, and then there was some text along with it. It was like a kind of a new media art piece. And some of that ended up into the book. A lot of it didn't. The images did. And what I find, because I have like sort of a varied practice actually, but most of what I do ends up subordinating itself to the poems. So I had this whole other piece that, ended up not making it out into the world as it was, but it made it into the poems and this other form completely. So things can start kind of in any, realm for me. And then it's sort of as they end up showing me what part of them the reader needs, then they'll end up in the poem. I hope that touched on some part of the question.
It definitely did.
But yeah, it's not linear.
If you would read us the poem on page 20 from the Archive of American Object Lessons, we can get introduced to this idea of the dress. And
Sure, I've actually never read this one out loud because it has a timeline in it, which is a little not as I don't know, lyric, I guess. So I've actually never read this one, so this will be fun. From the Archive of American Object Lessons, and the first 2 pages are a sort of object description, like you would see in a museum. Object name: self-portrait of the speaker in her great-grandmother's dress. Materials: cotton, cloudy water, muddy footprints, large rocks, barbed wire, white girlhood, glass beads, small rocks, open access, cattails, humidity, search engine, mothballs. Place: Minnesota, Fort Yates, Hillsboro, Rex Hill, in the bathroom mirror, under the hosta's lip, on the highest shelf, beneath the box spring, on a USB, East Hollywood, unknown. Date created: March 3rd, 1863. President Lincoln signs into law an act for the removal of the Sisseton, Wahpeton, Metawakanton, and Wapakuta bands of Sioux or Dakota Indians, and for the disposition of their lands in Minnesota and Dakotas. 1910. Campfire Girls, an outdoor program for young women, begins in Vermont. The founders model symbols and activities on their idea of Native American culture. 19. My great-grandmother, Lorena, joins Campfire Girls. She sews a ceremonial gown meant to resemble traditional clothing of Plains Indians. Lorena poses for a photo in the dress, paddling a canoe. 1928. My grandfather, Robert, attends St. Bernard Mission School on Standing Rock Indian Reservation. The boys learn to garden, the girls to sew. 1935, Robert's family moves to Oregon. They pawn heirlooms, including regalia, before they go. 1946, Lorena's daughter, Helen, marries Robert. Lorena passes the Campfire Girls dress to Helen, who keeps it. 1980, Robert and Helen's daughter, Anne, wears the Campfire Girls dress to Cultural Heritage Day at her high school. 2000. The photo of Lorena in her dress is lost somewhere between houses. 2019, Anne, my mother, finds the dress hanging in a closet. She folds it into a padded envelope and mails it to me. 2020. I set up a tripod and record myself putting on the dress and taking it off over and over. Watching the footage, I'm startled by how much I look like her. 2023. The Sioux Dakota Removal Act has not yet been repealed. The personal is familial, is cultural, is circumspect, is historical, is direct, is a fraudulent, is antique, is cotton, is light brown, is fringed, is hemmed, is an embroidered, is beaded, is folded, is treasured, is addressed, is redressed, is an underdress, is undressing. Addressing now that Cultural Heritage Day. Mom in her room after school. Square room, Hello Kitty poster. She stands by the window, hair damp at the neck. Is it okay for me to see her? Her as my invention, in her private environment. She's still wearing the dress, wrinkled at the thighs, sweat stains, mustard spot in the shape of a comma. Thick cotton the color of hide peeled from a deer. Old cotton, smelling of powder. Hem heavy with beads. From the kitchen, the smell of toast burning. Her many brothers laughing in the living room. She can't see all sides of herself at once, only the tip of her nose with one eye closed. They are laughing too loud. My fear of revealing to herself her own body. Is it okay, Mom, for me to undress you, only to discard the costume? Outside, it is raining. Steady drops rolling from the tips of the ferns. It is a ceremony of a kind. You pull the dress into your fists and over your head. You disappear from me without leaving your room.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually wonderful to hear it be read. So I
Fun
was
to meet you.
I was imagining it without being able to see it on the page, and it was it was wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I read another review that talked about your use of punctuation and the way that they thought it was sort of using punctuation as a weapon, the brackets and the things like that. But I felt like that was probably somewhat true, but I also think there's more to it than that. Were you super conscious about putting in the punctuation? Did it just feel right at the moment and you didn't have a conscious thought of using certain punctuation marks in certain ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the punctuation functions differently in different poems. In some poems, it is sort of a visual strategy. So with the arrows that appear in the long poem Epigenesis, it's a visual strategy as alongside um, serving to kind of teach the reader how to read the poem. The brackets that are used throughout too create an absence visually, while also sort of teaching the reader how to read the book. So in some poems, I would say I would maybe separate it, like in some poems, the punctuation has this extra role to play that almost kind of is elevated to the same level as the words, right? It's like creating meaning and creating feeling.
Yeah.
And in some of the poems, it's maybe more traditional where the punctuation is really important, but it has that more traditional linguistic role. And a lot of times the poems that don't have punctuation in them at all, like 8.5 by 11, which I read earlier, there's something in there about that poem really toggling between the internal and the external, where it just couldn't take the punctuation. And the punctuation was sort of disrupting the way that I wanted the white space to. It was almost like I think of some of the poems in the book as having the white space. The white space is there and the words are like floating above it, but those are the two layers of the poem, is the white space and the words. And what punctuation does is this weird, like making the white space almost less important. I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, that's how I like to think about it. Like,
It does.
I want the white space to come forward to the same level as the language. So I think like in different poems in the book, the punctuation serves different strategies, and it has to always kind of match the needs of that poem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The poem live stream on page 48 was the
Yeah.
next one that I had wondered if you could read to us. It has a very regular form, but it starts giving us a little bit of a look at technology, the way that it connects us and connects us from with the past, but the way it also separates us. And in the case of absences or erasures, they become obvious when it comes to technology. And this poem, Live Stream, seems to be, along with that, there's also what I find to be a sort of a paired subject matter of things you've experienced yourself in relation to the body and one's connection or disconnection from one's own body, and the feeling of that maybe there's some kind of connection with our bodies today and historical trauma that's been passed down in sort of the psyche of the DNA or something, the DNA of the psyche, I should say. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that because if you want to,
Yeah.
Because it's very interesting to me. Some people would have chosen to write a book about the relationship with the body and food and things like that, and then write a different book about the removal acts. But you make it make sense that they're together. So I'm just curious about how that works.
Yeah, I think they're definitely inseparable for me. But that's interesting you say that, because it did start out as 2 books, actually. I had one manuscript. Yeah, I had one manuscript that was more confessional poems. And then I had this archival manuscript, and neither one of them were really doing what I wanted. And then once I put them together in the same Word document, I was like, Oh, that's right. Like there's really no difference. I think about it in terms of like something that's happening to my own body and something that's happening to the body in the historical past is like the same level of immediacy and the same level of importance to the speaker. Another thing about it is that because even in the more archival poems, you're like you said, it's sort of like the body of the speaker is encountering things via technology. But for me, technology becomes like a very sensory experience. It serves to separate, but it's like touching a keyboard and like looking. It has like a haptic sort of sense um, of experience of encountering things through the internet and through like using a laptop. So even that, what I'm interested in most was not like this historical document of the removal act or this like piece of legislature, but this person's bodily experience of experiencing that. So it's this like bodily experience that kind of shoots out in multiple directions, and some of them shoot out into the past, and then some of them are a historical past, and some of them shoot out into like a a more biographical past. But it's like the same body that's having this web of experience.
They certainly snap together in your mind as you're reading through, and it's great. If you would read live stream, and then we can talk a little more about that, perhaps.
Yeah. Live stream. I'm back looking at the photo of her grave while on another screen, live streaming a rare moonflower closed in a Cambridge greenhouse, single tapering bud about to bloom, at which point science pollinates delicately with a damp paintbrush, then the scent turns rancid and dies. All this in 12 hours. I can watch from my bedroom where blood has dried on my sheets in the mirrored shape of a heart. I hate that I think this way, searching for beauty in any accident. The fading stain I have not washed out, while my smallest screen glows with warnings from a watering app. Take action, take action. I try to keep plants alive and succeed, so long as I look at them often with steady gaze, refocusing on what matters. In the shot, for me and 179 other waiting viewers, the moonflower has not moved perceptibly, nor have I, from this photo of her grave, timestamped 7/14/04, below the marble pillar with sunken inscription and carved cross, there a pink blur must be roses. I zoom until they fill the screen, heads and necks, shades of pinks, secreting their scents amid the long grass, trampled by whoever in the flesh picked the roses, arranged them, left them to be preserved by chance at their most open.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an experience that so many of us have had, but you have a whole entirely different context with this experience. Many of us have looked at a grave site on, Find a Grave or something like that, but with a different background, a different history attached to it. And often some people are allowed to know more about their history than others. And for others, there's been an attempt at erasure. So it's harder.
Yeah.
The page 61 has a poem called Statement of Purpose. And I felt like it's quite a long one too, but 2 pages, but it does talk a lot about language and about poetic lineage. And so I thought if you could read that one, I would. like
Yeah.
thoughts on it afterward too.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Statement of purpose. I speak one language. I want another English degree. Since childhood, I haven't settled anywhere due to poetry in pursuit of unread books unpacked again, stacked in corners. Furniture left on a curb in the rain. When Grandpa was young, he says, his father sold the regalia so Esther could attend secretary school. They lived in South Dakota. Dakota, we call ourselves. South, positioning one state below another, as I position myself lifting a fringed shirt over my head, or in a life typing what other people say. Next paragraph. Research interests, poetic lineage. In the trunk of my car, a mildewed coat, powder green, for I live in a state with damp air where events begin with land acknowledgements. That air interests me, wetter than gray, and the austere silence after thanking Indians broadly as if none were present. Fleeing a famine, he says, they found here a one-room shack, and I, seeking poetry, have found myself under cheap bulbs, eschewing abstract words like poetry for concrete ones like poem. Now a detail to pull the reader in. Teen me walking home in a red cardigan stitched with the school crest, Soli Deo Gloria on a banner, sleeves unraveling. Life felt discreetly mine, and art, like love, something perfect to be made in the future. It interests me where things end up. Esther was a typist for the agency. Books become text. Family becomes provenance. I find online, glass cased, Yankton, Dakota chief's outer dress, provenance unknown, draped on a suggestion of human. I have, concretely, my face in the mirror, settled light on itself. Another poem opening with a first-person declaration. I speak one language. I want another English degree. In my car, that coat I've left for months. How could I forget to step into his house, Dakota land, a piece the size of a placard? He rises from a recliner. Oh, it's going along. Squeezes my hands, asks where I'm moving, never why. To have lived through so many omissions. To be a sleeve, no arms inside. Yet I've worked hard for this 4.0 in concrete details, e.g. he stands in his suspenders and pilled polyester gray pants, eyes spotted with dark pools I peer into and through to. Did you like that? Did I please you? Do my concerns reveal a clear thematic line? And what do you think of my future? Is it bright? Brain bright like whip smart or white, bright proliferating sun, ray here, ray there, jagged glare outside the glass case inside of which I'm squinting, spores coating the surface of my tongue, and in the hollow of my mouth, I finally.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The endings of so many of the poems are really feel monumental when you're reading them. They either drop off the edge of a cliff like this one, or there's some unexpected thing at the end of a poem. And and then the next poem on the next page, the title of it is a series of zeros. And so those kinds of things just keep a reader totally engaged. There's also a lot of scholarship in this book, as well as experimentation.
Yeah.
The notes at the end are just full of great information about the poems and background and essential information for someone who wants to dig deeper into the poems. Was your intent for people to both experience the book initially as a book of poetry and then to perhaps study the book? How would you hope that your reader would engage with these poems as they work through your book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I would just want them to be read as poems. I don't think I'm a very good scholar. Um, certainly not. And even though I'm, an academic, I don't, academia is sort of just like my way to have support while I do what I want to do. So I don't have my scholarly commitments are labile. Um, so I think that what's most important to me is that it's a book of poems. I think that it's complicated. The answer, maybe not the answer is complicated, but the situation is complicated when the things you're writing about are things that a lot of people are very ignorant about. Um, so maybe it makes the question more complicated. I think the answer doesn't really change for me. Um, I specifically didn't include actually a lot of facts in the book because it's not a book of history. And some of the facts are like facts about my family, so they're not going to teach anybody
Right.
anything about
Right.
you know about native people or even about like my tribe specifically. You're not going to learn much from the book. I think that what I would say is if the book opens people up to want to find out more about something, I think that that's wonderful. um but that's not why I wrote it, and that's not what I'm hoping for from people or expecting from people, because it's a book of poems. um and it's not going to have a crazy wide readership compared with like, because it's a book of poems compared with if somebody wrote a different genre of book. So specifically for me, I would want them to be read as poems, and then I think if it opens up into another yeah way for them to want to experience something after, I think that's great.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I work with first year college students mostly, so
Yeah.
many of them would be amazed at the things they're reading here and be definitely learn from it as well as and they maybe don't have the facility yet to experience poems fully in the way that but I think they would love this book because of the nature of it. It doesn't look like traditional poetry, and so they would be interested in it. So
That's a good, yeah, I mean, that's a good way of thinking about it too, is like how I guess I want people to approach it according to the capacity that they have. And so, yeah, I'm
yeah.
glad to have people do that. Yeah.
So we talked about the book in the poem called Screenshots,
Mhm.
and it's a very long portion. It's very worth every word and every page that it covers. And so I would like to have you, if you would, read as much of it as you feel comfortable reading and stop wherever you feel comfortable stopping. And then readers will need to get the book and go on and read it for themselves. So
Yeah, let's see
it starts on 78.
here. Okay. Screenshots. Um, and it starts with an epigraph that sort of frames that the screenshots and the website findagrave.com, the memorial page for Elizabeth Lizzie Bercier Major, who is my great great grandmother. Excuse me. Here, Elizabeth, here in her portrait taken at Standing Rock, and here another photo of a painting of her photo. Unremarkable painting, I decide, but faithful to its source. Broad brows arcing, clumsy gleam dropped in the center of each pupil. Paintings are, in English, made, while photos are taken, like care, hills, space. I sat today, carefully arranged, as a man angled lights at my face. No one's really looked at you, he said. His camera made, honed and splendid, the feeling in my eyes, feeling I had in English, like names, children, lunch. I've never looked at, not really. So unremarkable, my faithful. In this rented room, I took what I have and I made. She was born in winter, in a place where November is winter. Snow on the ground, or too early for snow. Slow tongues, thick tonsils, hemlock boughs dragging, hard dirt. Wet air on the surface of her eye when first she lifted lids and saw the face of her mother looming, half shadowed. Partial moon. No thought yet of mother. No glimpse yet of moon. Curved pale outside, barely above. Lids closing, opening. A wail, thumbs uncurling. I'm here, but she is dead. In the sleigh, wrapped around her daughter, wrapped around her baby, unplumbed, nose hairs cased in ice, glowing hearts, Valentine's Day. The miles between birth and death equaling the forced free. She would have been 16. Nails gnawed to skin, arms crossed over her chest as she walked, eyes trained on dust rising up from the heels of those before her, dust settling again on the road, breath of footsteps moving dust, moval. Leather ribbons silently loosening from her hair, falling through cold air, curling over and onto itself. On foot and in wagons, passing identical, town after town, procession of Dakota prisoners, 4 miles long, abstracted to dark furrows in that landscape. My family does not speak about it. The soldiers chained, their feet together, heads covered with blankets, stomachs empty, throats parched, settlers opened, front doors, lined the streets, throwing rocks and sticks, tomatoes and rotten eggs. We don't really speak about it. Scalding water poured from an open window, from this great distance. Prisoners pulled by long hair from wagons. You can imagine the reasons. Even a baby, remember, snatched from its mother, dashed to the ground. The face of anger, contorting like face of pain. A mother's wails, rising, washed away with river silt. None of us speak. What can I do? Count breaths in her head, lift her eyes to see. One-eyed rabbit, steam plume, bare barn, elk tracks, barbed wire, cloud furrows, new snow. Standing still while hills rolled backward. Even as a child, I won every staring contest. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for reading that, Erin.
Of course.
This is a wonderful book. I can't say enough good about it, and I'm going to spend more time with it. I read it through twice, but I still feel like there's things to discover for me.
That's
So,
very kind.
yeah, thank you. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. You're a little earlier than we are. We're kind of at the end of our evening, but
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to you to come and do this for SoFloPoJo, and we'll be sure to let you know when it's up and live so everyone can watch it.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It was
You're
lovely
welcome.
to talk to you. And to get to read too. I didn't know I was going to get to do that. So really
Oh,
nice.
wonderful. Good.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye.